The silence in a crowded room is a specific kind of heavy, and for David Chen, it was a weight he carried every single day. At 15 years old, David was a ghost within the walls of a state-run group home, navigating a world that provided a bed and a hot meal, but absolutely nothing resembling a family. He was a quiet teenager, the kind who folded himself into the corners of the common room, desperate to remain unseen by the chaotic churn of the foster system around him. That facility was designed for containment rather than comfort, a transient holding pen where youth were processed rather than nurtured. Fluorescent lights hummed over scuffed linoleum floors, illuminating a space where survival meant keeping your head down and your emotions locked away. The staff, overworked and perpetually under-resourced, focused entirely on the logistics of housing and education, leaving the deep, aching emotional voids of the children completely unattended. When David vanished on a damp Tuesday evening in November, the absence barely registered as a ripple in the facility routine. An empty bed at bed check was a common occurrence, a logistical headache rather than a siren of immediate danger. The caretakers quickly filed the standard paperwork, checking the box that would seal his fate for months to come, officially classifying the quiet teenager as a habitual runaway. That single word is a bureaucratic poison pill that immediately downgrades the urgency of a missing child. Law enforcement agencies, overwhelmed by violent crime and shrinking budgets, rarely mobilize search parties for a foster youth who supposedly chose to walk out the front door. The assumption was that he was simply rebelling, a troubled kid seeking freedom on the streets, and so the investigation stalled before it ever truly began. But the reality of that night was far darker than a simple act of teenage rebellion. David had not fled the group home in search of adventure. He had been meticulously lured into the shadows by individuals who understood exactly how to weaponize his profound sense of isolation. His quiet desperation for connection had made him the perfect target for a highly organized human trafficking ring operating right under the noses of the authorities. The grooming process began weeks before he ever stepped off the facility grounds, unfolding entirely within the glowing borders of a smartphone screen. Predators hiding behind fake profiles had infiltrated the social media spaces where marginalized youth gather to seek validation and a sense of belonging. They offered the teenager exactly what the state could not provide, showering him with attention, false promises of security, and the intoxicating illusion that he finally mattered to someone. This digital hunting ground is a terrifying reality for youth across the nation, a demographic disproportionately targeted by exploitation networks. Traffickers study the vulnerabilities of children in the system, recognizing that a lack of stable guardians and deep-seated emotional trauma create the ultimate recipe for compliance. They prey on financial insecurities and the desperate need for affection, transforming the fundamental human desire for family into a psychological trap. The child welfare infrastructure was completely oblivious to the silent invasion happening through the wireless network of their own facility. Staff members were trained to break up physical fights and ensure curfew compliance, but they lacked any specialized training to identify the subtle, insidious signs of online grooming. These systemic blind spots allowed the traffickers to operate with impunity, building a bridge of false trust directly into an isolated world. By the time the trap finally closed, the victim believed he was making a rational choice to leave a cold institution for a warm, loving home. The psychological manipulation was absolute, convincing a vulnerable boy that the strangers on the internet were his true protectors, while the social workers and police were the enemies. He packed a single duffel bag in the dead of night, stepping out into the cold with a heart full of manufactured hope. A vehicle was waiting exactly 2 blocks away, idling in the shadows just beyond the glow of the streetlights. The moment he climbed into the passenger seat, the digital illusion shattered, replaced instantly by the brutal physical reality of captivity. His phone was immediately confiscated, severing his only lifeline to the outside world, and the gentle voices of his online friends dissolved into the harsh commands of his new captors. Back at the residential center, the days bled into weeks, and the cold trail grew completely frozen. Because the disappearance was miscategorized, no detectives scoured his digital footprint, no warrants were issued for his social media data, and no one realized that a predator had been communicating with him for a month. The failure to recognize the intersection of state care and illicit syndicates left a child entirely abandoned to his fate. Inside the network, David was systematically stripped of his identity and his agency, reduced to a commodity to be traded and abused. He was moved rapidly between cheap motels and undisclosed residential properties, a deliberate tactic designed to induce disorientation and prevent any chance of escape. The profound betrayal of those who had promised him a family deepened his trauma, locking him in a psychological prison far stronger than any physical chains. The first crack in the case did not come from a massive police mobilization, but from the relentless dedication of a single, newly assigned social worker who refused to accept the official narrative. Reviewing the cold file, she noticed inconsistencies in his behavior leading up to that November night, subtle shifts in his mood, and reports of a sudden, unexplained attachment to a secret mobile device. She bypassed the standard protocols and pushed for a specialized cybercrimes unit to pull the archived data from the facility rotor. The digital logs revealed a horrifying volume of encrypted traffic flowing to known exploitation hubs in the weeks before the empty bed was discovered. Investigators meticulously reconstructed the deleted conversations, tracing the internet protocol addresses through a labyrinth of proxy servers to uncover a sprawling network of illicit activity. The data painted a terrifying picture of a sophisticated operation that specialized in identifying, isolating, and extracting vulnerable teenagers directly from state custody. This revelation shattered the complacent assumption that such horrors only happened to runaways who had already been living on the streets for years. It proved that predators were actively breaching the walls of the foster system, exploiting the very safety nets designed to protect the most marginalized children in society. The investigation forced a harsh light onto the negligence that allowed such a massive breach of security to go completely unnoticed. Armed with the digital evidence, law enforcement finally launched a coordinated, multi-jurisdictional operation targeting the financial and communication nodes of the ring. Months of painstaking surveillance culminated in a synchronized raid on 3 separate locations, bringing armored vehicles and tactical teams to the quiet suburban neighborhoods where the syndicate hid their victims. The doors were breached in the early hours of the morning, shattering the false security of the captors. When investigators found David in a windowless room at the back of a dilapidated property, the quiet teenager was almost unrecognizable. The toll of continuous abuse and psychological terror had hollowed him out, leaving behind a profound exhaustion that radiated from his posture. The rescue was chaotic and loud, a violent collision of tactical gear and shattered glass that offered salvation but also compounded the deep trauma he had endured. Even in the aftermath of his recovery, the bureaucracy continued to fail him, initially treating him with the suspicion reserved for juvenile delinquents rather than the empathy owed to a survivor. The deeply ingrained prejudice against wards of the state meant that he had to fight to be recognized as a victim rather than a complicit participant in his own tragedy. This secondary victimization is a devastating reality for countless exploited children who are criminalized by the very authorities meant to protect them. The undeniable evidence of the grooming process eventually forced a reckoning within the local legal system, clearing his name and exposing the profound inadequacies of the initial response. The mislabeled file became a glaring indictment of the child welfare bureaucracy, proving that the runaway assumption was not just lazy police work, but a dangerous mechanism that actively protected predators. The fallout demanded immediate sweeping changes to how missing youth were classified and pursued. Advocates and survivors rallied around the shocking details of the investigation, using the undeniable proof of systemic negligence to demand specialized support for vulnerable children. They fought for mandated training protocols, forcing caretakers and social workers to learn the complex psychology of online grooming and the specific tactics used by syndicates. The goal was to transform the frontline workers from mere administrators into vigilant protectors capable of spotting the invisible signs of danger. For David, the road to reclaiming his life was a brutal uphill battle through layers of complex post-traumatic stress and a shattered sense of trust. Healing required more than just physical safety. It demanded intense, specialized therapy designed to dismantle the psychological conditioning inflicted by his captors. He had to slowly relearn how to connect with the world, fighting through the lingering belief that every offer of kindness was just another trap waiting to spring. His survival casts a long, sobering shadow over the thousands of other youth who remain lost in the margins, highly vulnerable to the exact same predatory tactics. The intersection of foster care and human trafficking remains one of the most critical underreported crises in modern society, an invisible pipeline fueled by systemic neglect and a profound lack of resources. Every child who ages out of the system without a permanent family carries a target on their back, visible only to those who wish to exploit their loneliness. The legacy of this intense investigation is a permanent demand for vigilance, a refusal to accept the comfortable lies that allow society to look away from its most discarded children. We can no longer afford the blind spots that allowed a quiet teenager to be stolen from a place of supposed safety, nor can we accept a system that criminalizes the victims of its own failures. True justice requires not just the prosecution of the traffickers, but a fundamental transformation of how we value and protect the youth in state custody. David Chen's story is a harrowing testament to the darkest realities of exploitation, but it is also a profound declaration of human resilience in the face of unimaginable betrayal. He survived the shadows of a system that forgot him and the cruel manipulation of those who sought to consume him. His enduring strength forces us to look closer at the quiet kids in the crowded rooms, reminding us that the fight for truth and safety must never, ever stop.